Welcome to Module 1. In Module 1, we're going to look at an introduction to threat intelligence. So the objective of Module 1 is to learn the concepts, the fundamental concepts of threat intelligence. We're going to look at some of the importance of threat intelligence, the types of threat intelligence, life cycle, strategy, capabilities, maturity model, and frameworks. We're going to look at that plus a lot more. Let's get started with Module 1. We're going to start with some terminology. We're going to look at some of the essential terminology. We're going to look at intelligence versus information versus data. There's a big difference between the three. We're also going to dive into intelligence-led security testing. We're going to look at the background for this type of security testing and some of the reasoning behind it. Let's start with some terminology. So, bullet point number 1, intelligence is a process that utilizes information to analyze and respond to emerging requirements of an organization. So what we want to do is we want to take the requirements that are changing throughout time. For those of you who've been in IT for decades, imagine some of the information that you gathered and some of the threats that were around at the beginning of your career versus what you have right now. For instance, crypto mining threats were not in the 90s. You never had to worry about crypto mining threats in the 90s or even in the first decade of the 21st century. But now it's a big deal. And then we have demarcations that mark the beginning of an event that changes the threat landscape from henceforth, like the leaking of those CIA security tools. So there are things that we look at that are different from the perspective of where you are in time, right? So they are emerging requirements. Next bullet point, intelligence converts what and how of the information into why and when of the problem-solving process. So we have what, we have how. In other words, we know that a specific point of data of intelligence has been gathered, but now we want to get to the reasoning behind it, when it happened, and eventually make it into something actionable for our organization. Let's look at some terminology here. Cyber threat, it's a possibility of performing malicious actions to damage critical IT resources of the target organization. And really, it is a conglomeration of two words, right? Cyber, meaning information technology, and we have threat, which is what we're going to define that in more terse terms, but it's a possibility that something bad will happen. And there is the possibility of a threat, of course, but where it really finds its fruition is in the fact that there is a vulnerability. A vulnerability is the existence of a weakness in design, an implementation error that can lead to some type of unexpected event or compromise of that system. And so without a vulnerability, there really exists no major threats. But there are vulnerabilities for all types, classes, and models of systems. The next thing we look at is the zero-day attack. I'm sure you're familiar with this one. It's an attack that exploits a vulnerability before the developer releases a patch for the vulnerability. With a zero-day attack, a system can be compromised before even anybody at that organization, or indeed cybersecurity analysts or people who discover these types of threats actually know that it's taken place or that it's even a possibility. The system can already be compromised. And we'll also talk about, when we get into zero-day attacks, how to be a step ahead of everybody else and find those vulnerabilities before there are patches and make those vulnerabilities less likely to affect your system based upon the actions that you take for your organization. An exploit It's a breach of an IT security system through vulnerability. So we have a vulnerability. It could be a zero-day vulnerability. Like most exploits, it's probably a well-known and well-documented vulnerability. And some actor takes advantage of the fact that that vulnerability exists and has not been mitigated, allowing them to exploit it, to hack into that system. We also have APT, or Advanced Persistent Threats, an attack that's focused on stealing information from the victim machine without the user being aware of it. It's a threat that resides on the machine. And here we say a user's machine, but most of these are on servers. So on servers that are on VMs in your organization, or on bare metal, or wherever they are, or on host machines in an organization, where there's a threat that just sits there and mines information. Risk. What is risk? Risk is the degree of uncertainty or expectation that an adverse event may cause damage to the system. Now, risk is not a pie in the sky type of word. Risk is actually a calculation. And we'll talk about the differences between risk and the different types of risks and how they work with our organizations, how organizations should work with them to make sure that we don't fall prey to those types of risks. So we'll look at risk analysis, and threat analysis in this. So we'll look at risk analysis, and how they relate to threats. Information security, a state of well-being of information infrastructure in which the possibility of theft, tampering, and disruption of information and services is kept low or tolerable. So what we're saying is we want to take our information systems, be they host systems, be they networks of hosts and servers, cloud interconnects, IoT, AI, and any other type of information system, and secure it to the best possible level so that any risk, any threat is kept very low, very minimal. Let's look at intelligence versus information versus data. So before we do that, let's have a look at the idea of a threat. Now, what I was talking about before in terms of risk is a calculation. So when we talk about risk, which will get us into what a threat is, we need to look at it as a financial proposition. In other words, with risk, I can measure the possibility that a threat will be actualized to a specific asset. So for instance, let's say I have a server, and the server, because of its firmware or its operating system version, or software that's running on it, has a possibility of compromise. Let's say that I have a printer, and because of that printer's firmware, there's a possibility of compromise. Now, the server is part of a cluster that is running all of my e-commerce and has a database on it that, if compromised, might cost the company millions of dollars. And in some cases, depending on the type of implementation, it could be millions of dollars a minute. Like we look at the companies the size of Amazon, or the size of some of the large companies that do that type of business. On the other hand, the same level of threat applies to this printer. But let's say that the threat will crash the printer. Okay, so I have a risk because of these two threats. And one risk can cost me $1 million. The other one will mean that someone has to reboot the printer. So we look at these on a continuum, and we address the most egregious, persistent threats first. We'll talk about the terminology that applies to all of this as we go through the course. We address those first because those give us the highest risk. And then we go to the lowest risk threats, and we either address them last, or in some cases, not at all. But what is a threat? According to the Oxford Dictionary, a threat is the possibility of a malicious attempt to damage or disrupt a computer or network system. So it's a possibility. When we see a possibility, think probability. Think bell curve distributions. What we're looking at here is a statistical probability that a malicious attempt will disrupt that system. So that's what a threat is. And so that's where we start when we're looking at intelligence versus information versus data. So let's talk first of all about data. Data is, in its raw form, a huge volume, defines, for instance, an object or an individual, doesn't include any context, and is unprocessed. So here is a piece of data. Ready? 128. What does that mean? It probably means nothing to you. Is it a part of an IP address? Is it a part of an address for some type of business location? We have no idea because it's unprocessed. It's non-contextualized. And so data in and of itself can be meaningless. What we're looking for is information. Let's look at information. Information is interconnected. It's an interconnected bunch of raw data providing meaningful information that states facts about human queries and knowledge. So 128 is actually part of an IP address, 192.168.128.75. That gives us context. In fact, we can even take that now and link it to a specific MAC address, to a specific host, or something like that, right? So information is usable. Think about SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. There are radio telescopes out there scanning and looking for intelligence. They're looking for information. But mostly what they get is data, a pulsar that pulses once every 4 seconds, or something like that. That's a slow pulsar. But all that is just data. If we hear some type of code that has something to do with prime numbers, then now we have information and we realize that we're dealing with an intelligence. So there's a big difference between data and information. Now let's move to intelligence. It's analyzed and interpreted information providing broader, in-depth knowledge of the subject that supports decision-making and response actions. So I had data, 128. I have information. It's part of an IP address, 192.168.128. something. And that belongs to a host. Intelligence says that host was scanning my network. All right, now that is something I can work with. It's actionable information. And so now I'll be able to make use of that. So very important to find out and understand the difference between those. We're always looking for intelligence, not just data. Now let's look at intelligence-led security testing. We're going to look at the background and the reasonings for this. So intelligence-led security testing provides contextual intelligence at every stage of testing that guides the security professional, that's you or me, to make appropriate decisions. All right, so we're taking that data and we're putting it into a form that is actual intelligence. And no matter where we are in terms of testing our network, testing our programmatic stack, testing our hosts, we want to know how should the security testing be conducted to give us the most intelligence. What attack methods should be simulated? And so, for instance, we're going to use different attack methods when we're looking at the network edge, where perhaps we have a bunch of Cisco routers or network edge devices, which is going to be a lot different than we're looking at the interior of our apps. For instance, we have an N-tier app, and at the lowest tier we have a database, and we have some type of middle objects, and then we have a user interface at the top. A lot different the testing model is going to be a lot different for those different types of situations. So What attack methods? Next, where should they focus their resources? And so we want to also balance the risks that we have in the organization and focus on the $1 million risk rather than the reboot the copier level risk. So we want to focus that based upon intelligence. Next, intelligence-led security testing provides an effective and structured approach to test the IT critical resources of an organization to remediate and mitigate the risk beforehand. Let's talk about some of the terminology that we have here. So number one, we want to look at critical IT resources. And in any IT organization or any organization that has IT, I should say, there used to be a time when IT was really a separate part of the organization. But since then, we've come across the idea of DevOps. DevOps means that not only is IT as integral as the electricity or the ventilation, but it is also critical for the success or failure of the delivery of the product of the organization. And so with that in mind, we can zoom in on the critical parts of our IT resources that help deliver those critical resources. And so what we want to do, let's look at the first term I want to zoom in on here, which is remediate. Remediate is to take an existing situation that exposes a vulnerability and to take that vulnerability and make it less vulnerable or not vulnerable. That's remediation. So with remediation, you can take a situation, perform, for instance, an upgrade on a system, software, firmware, and that what that will do is it will mitigate that risk. So mitigate means to take a risk and make it less of a risk. For instance, we have a situation where there is a router at the network edge, and there's a risk associated with this router. I've seen this many times where there is an administrative risk, meaning that somebody can administer the router externally if certain things are not done to mitigate the risk. And so one of the things that you could do to mitigate the risk is to upgrade your firmware on that router. A second thing that you can do to mitigate that risk is turn off external administration. So does that get rid of the risk entirely? Well, perhaps not. Perhaps there is some type of way that you can still administer the router, but it might involve getting physical access to the router after that. So we want to mitigate the risk. And we want to do this beforehand. So this is another important term, beforehand. All right, so it's great to lock down the network after you've been breached, but it is horrible to have been breached. So we want to do that beforehand. Next, it simulates the existing and current threats, giving that organization the current threat scenario, including strengths, risks, and vulnerabilities. So this is where we do our actual hacking. And when we say simulating a threat, that means that we take an existing system and we either virtualize it and then simulate an attack against it, or back it up and then run an attack against the actual system to show that that vulnerability exists so that we can understand how to mitigate and remediate that threat. And then we remediate and mitigate the risk and then go back and show again through simulation that that has been done, right? So the threat, the risk no longer exists. And so we do this over and over again in the life cycle of threat mitigation, and eventually that provides us with a much more resilient organization. So let's look at some of the items that we need to review to understand cyber threat intelligence. We need to look at a definition of cyber threat intelligence. We'll look at that in just a moment. We're going to look at the stages of cyber threat intelligence, characteristics and benefits of threat intelligence. We're going to look at enterprise objectives for threat intelligence programs. And Also, how can threat intelligence help organizations and the types of threat intelligence, threat intelligence generation. Also, we're going to look at risk management, SEIM, and we're going to look at enhanced incident response, some scenarios that your organization might be able to use for using threat intelligence. Also, what do organizations and analysts expect? Next, we'll look at responsibilities of cyber threat for the cyber threat analyst. We're going to look at threat intelligence use cases. So we're going to look at all of that. Let's start with a definition of cyber threat intelligence. CTI, or cyber threat intelligence, what is it? It's the collection and analysis of information. All right, there are two major things here. Collection. So we're going to use tools and means to analyze, it's a second thing we said here, information. So we're going to be gathering information, we're going to collect it, we're going to analyze it, and we're going to put it into a presentation where either our organization or management can take advantage of that information. What's it about? What are we taking and collecting information and analyzing? This is about threats, about adversaries. We're looking to draw patterns that provide the ability to make knowledgeable decisions for preparedness, prevention, and response actions against various cyber threats. So we want to be prepared. Again, we're going to always emphasize having preparedness, addressing the threat beforehand, not as a response to the threat happening. So we want to prevent it and respond if at some point the threat becomes a reality and we have an attack. We want to know how to respond. So that's the first definition. The second one is it helps the organization to identify and mitigate various business risks by converting unknown threats into known threats, and helps in implementing various advanced and proactive defense strategies. So what we're doing is we're saying, hey, we are going to defend the business. And that's what most of this is about, because it's the business that is the engine of the organization. I mean, you're bringing in money, you're servicing your customers, you're providing a product, you're bringing in more money, you're researching new products, you're providing customer support, and then boom, you're hit by a giant attack, and now you can no longer sell to your customers, no longer make money, the business goes down the tubes. So we want to make that investigation and mitigation happen beforehand. We'll look at that as we go along. So we're going to look at some of the stages of cybersecurity intelligence. Number one, the concept of intelligence is somehow reflecting the concept of knowns and unknowns. These are proposed by Donald Rumsfeld, who was the former Defense Secretary for the United States of America. There are unknowns. So with the unknowns, these are something that we can't conceive of right now. In fact, we spend a lot of time casting about, attempting to turn what is unknown into something that is known. Right? Once it's known, we can turn that known data into intelligence that is, in the end, actionable. There are three stages in achieving the intelligence called unknown unknowns, known unknowns, and known knowns. Right? So unknown unknowns. We know nothing about it, like I said before. It doesn't exist in our universe. We had no idea that it was possible. There have been many terrorist attacks, many cyber attacks that were inconceivable for the longest time. Those were unknown unknowns. Right? And then at some point, you know that there is a corpus of information that you don't know. Like for instance, as you go through school and you learn things, What I say is that the more you know, the more you realize that you don't know anything. So if you go and learn in third grade, you learn how to multiply and divide and do some decimal, and then you realize, wait a minute, I heard you say a word. What was that? Trig what? Algebra? All right, wait a minute. There's more beyond that? I mean, there is calculus, and there's an entire corpus of mathematics that's so far beyond that, that the more you know about mathematics, the more you realize, wow, I really don't know anything. Well, the same thing works with cybersecurity. Once you find that, for instance, you see a certain pattern of information that's coming through your logs, perhaps your tools have flagged a very weird set of circumstances that is happening at the network edge or with an application. And you know perhaps that something odd is going on, but you do not know what that is. And so further investigation will hopefully bring that into the top of this green arrow here, a known known. You might realize, for instance, that somebody is running a fragmentation attack against the edge of your network, and the fragments of those segments are getting right past your edge network devices. They're being reassembled on the other end, and some type of attack is happening on the other side. It's now a known known. So let's look at the characteristics of threat intelligence. Number one, we collect data. This is the number one area for threat intelligence, because without data, even though it's not categorized and it's not intelligence yet, it eventually can be, and it will never be unless we collect it. So we get this data from multiple sources, like open source material that you can get anywhere. Anybody can get it. You don't need a subscription. You don't need any special knowledge. You can just go get this open source data. Commercial data feeds, you can get those. You have to pay for them, but you can get information you can get data from those commercial data feeds. And internal and external sources, so this can be inside the network or outside the network, we can get data. So first of all, collect data. Next, create, customize, and prioritize alerts based upon the IT infrastructure of the organization. This assumes that you have a good handle of your IT infrastructure. And this is an area that I would say that in a lot of my consulting gigs, where I go into an organization that I had previously had not much information about, one of the first things I ask my customer is for information on the IT infrastructure. You may or may not be amazed at how many people don't have a good handle on their IT infrastructure. So for instance, they may know about all the database servers, but they don't know anything about any of the identity servers or any of the edge network, or the people who work with the edge network may not know about any of the other services. There may not be a complete network map. There may not be a complete accounting of all of the different layers of all of the different apps that service the entire organization. So that's one of the first things that needs to be done. You need to make sure that you understand and characterize your IT infrastructure on an ongoing basis. Doing it once is fine, but if I ask you about your IT infrastructure and you show me a map from 2015, I can guarantee you that it's at least 25% different now. So it has to be on an ongoing basis. So in order for you to create customized, prioritized alerts, you really have to have that IT infrastructure down. And then we want to make sure and have those alerts available. All right, next, help in identifying initial indicators of compromise, or IOCs. Initial indicators of compromise. This is what I was just talking about before. You have an odd pattern that repeats over a specific period of time. You have data that gets changed, moved, that's missing. You have logs that are tampered with, or logs that are missing, something like that, right? So, so IOCs, and gradually pivots on to identify related indicators and artifacts to assess the possibility of attack. So we see that we are taking these IOCs and we're using these to help us identify This is a big deal, right? We want to not just have a vague, hazy notion that something's happening, but we want to identify what it is that's happening. We want to relate it to any other indicators, for instance, with perhaps an external scan or something, and any other artifacts to assess that possibility that we're being attacked. So those IOCs lead to the knowledge of the type of attack that it is eventually. Next bullet point, provides an ability to implement new protection strategies to prevent upcoming attacks. And to me, the biggest word here is new. What happens is once we find a good protection strategy and a good protection methodology, we become comfortable with it and we stick with it. Why are we sticking with it? Well, because it works. Well, it works today. That doesn't mean it's going to work 2 years from now, 2 months from now, or even 2 weeks from now. So you always need to be exploring the plethora of security information out there to make sure that you come up with new strategies, right? New protection strategies to prevent upcoming attacks. Next bullet point, provide an understanding of active campaigns that include who, what, when, where, why, and how of emerging security threats. As I've been a manager before in my career, and that's one of the things that I've had missing from some employees before is all of that, who, what, when, where, and why. So, for instance, they'll bring a piece of data to you, and you'll say, well, who did this? And they say, oh, let me go find out. And next time, all right, I see who did it, but when did it happen? Instead of bringing you the whole package. I had a manager that, maybe you've had a manager like this before, that would say, I don't want problems, I want solutions. And so when I go to a manager, one of the things I want to do is bring solutions. So for instance, I found that we're having an IOC, an initial indicator of compromise, and I had a pattern that looked like this. I tracked down the pattern, and I found out that it was this type of attack. I implemented this mitigation technique for the attack. I tested it, it worked. And so I suggest we do that on all of our routers. See, that's a solution, not saying, hey, boss, I think we might be getting attacked, right? So we want to make sure that not only do we have new strategies, we are always going back to the basics and looking at what's going on, but that we get an understanding of those active campaigns and we get the entire band of W's answered, who, what, when, where, why, and how, and make sure we are able to present that cogently. Next, provide insight into the probability of risks and its impact on business. One of the areas in this bullet point that I find is that depending on the business units, different business units and different areas of expertise tend to focus on only their area. And irrespective of whether it's a highly risky area or not. So for instance, if you're the person who manages all the printers, or just go back to my printer example, you're the person who purchases and installs all the printers, and you found out that on 15 of the printers there's a possibility of a malware attack that'll crash the printer, and you're so focused on that you can't see that, you know what, there's a bigger risk out there. So we need to categorize our risk and make sure that we provide the probability of the risk, and for that specific risk, put it into the bailiwick of your entire environment and what's most important in your environment. Lastly, in this slide, recommends various remediation and risk management solutions. And it's always better to have multiple ways to manage your risk. Now, you should know that there are a lot of apps out there that do a very good job in helping you to manage risk management, to help you to be creative in finding different areas of your organization. But there's also a lot of footwork that needs to be done by everybody that's involved in the organization. Next, we look at benefits of cyber threat intelligence. So what can cyber threat intelligence help you with? So properly applied, cyber threat intelligence can help you in the following areas. Number one, providing greater insight into cyber threats. You want to have that knowledge. Number two, preventing data loss by identifying the causes of data leakage. We also see that a properly applied cyber threat intelligence program can help in guiding incident response. And each of these bullet points, we're going to talk a little bit about them as we go through the course. I'm not going to spend too much time on all of these because we're going to hit them up as we go through the course. But just to say, the whole term incident response is an entire field that has a lot to, there's a lot of information that you can get out of that. But we're not going to, like I said, spend too much time on that. So guiding an incident response. The next one is conducting a data analysis to identify the exploitable data. Then we look at providing actionable, strategic, and tactical choices, conducting threat analysis for detecting advanced threats, sharing that threat information to spread awareness. Again, going back to those IOCs, identifying them, discovering tactics, techniques, and procedures, TTPs, for possible attacks. All right, that brings us to enterprise objectives for threat intelligence programs. So what we're looking at as enterprise is for a large business. And so if you're going to be running a threat intelligence program in your organization, which I'm assuming you are since you're in this class, or perhaps you're going to be involved with a threat intelligence program, here are some objectives for your business. Number one, enhanced and automated incident prevention. And this is an area that I will always emphasize, which is automation. There is too much information, too much data for one or even a group of people to be able to monitor, collect, collate, and turn into intelligent, actionable information. There's too much out there. So what we do is we automate it. So for instance, if you work in an organization that has 250 servers, are you going to be looking at the logs of all the syslog, event logs of all of those servers, and all of your 50 routers, and of all your switches, all your IoT devices, all your host computers? No, you're not going to. There's no way that you could even do it, even with a large staff. So you're going to need to automate this such that the information that looks like it needs to be examined will be presented to you. And if that's the case, you can go back and look at specific logs. So we want enhanced and automated incident prevention. So we don't want to prevent it just by hand. We want it automated. Number two, automation of security operations and remediation activities. What's the word again that we have here? Automation. Number one and number two are not number one and number two just because of an arbitrary posting. These are both high on the list. We want to automate the security operation and remediation activities. Here's a slight example of automatic remediation. All right, so your edge network has an app or device that looks for security issues, finds that there is activity coming from a specific IP address or range of IP addresses, right? So that it found that out automatically, and then it blocks that IP address or range of IP addresses. So we remediated that automatically. And then the third thing is, then it reports that information to appropriate authorities, right? So you'll get a report, these IP addresses were blocked. You may even see it real time, but you don't have to do it yourself. It's automated. So that's number one. And number two. Number three, guidance to cybersecurity activities. So we want our enterprise cybersecurity intelligence threat program to give us insight, to give us guidance, so that we can know, number one, if the activities that we are conducting to mitigate risk are effective, right? Number one. Number two, to suggest where we should go next for cybersecurity activities. So that entire system that we have running should help us with that. Number 4, improved risk management. So we want to know that the most risky areas in our organization are managed, and that this risk management is reviewed periodically, and that we are able to be sure that if there's any type of compromise, that it's not going to happen in any of our high risk areas. Number 4, improved incident detection. One of the worst types of incident detection that we can have is a false negative. A false negative is when your system says, nope, nothing's happening, everything's fine. That's a negative, right? But that's false because you're actually being attacked. Perhaps it's a zero-day attack. Perhaps it's a well-known attack. We want our incident detection to have as close to 0 false negatives as possible. We also want to limit false positives in our incident detection if possible, but false negatives are much worse than false positives. The problem with false positives, though, is they can lull you into sleep, right? You say, okay, every time it says we're being attacked, we're not really being attacked, so why am I looking at this report? It's like the boy who cried wolf. You know, he cried wolf so many times that when there's an actual attack, no one comes to his defense. And so we really want to avoid false positives. Now, false negatives are worse, but false positives are very bad also. And so our incident detection program needs to avoid both. So, in our continuing look at how threat intelligence can help organizations, let's look at the threat intelligence wheel that we see here. All right, so the first thing we look at is identify and protect. So we have an awareness of threats and vulnerabilities. We know that they're out there. We know what some of them, or even most of them, are specifically. And then we want to identify those and use those to thwart attacks. At the upper right quadrant here, right? Identify and protect. We also want to prepare an assessment of what those vulnerabilities and threats are. Then we move on to detection. And we want rapid detection of attacks. So we don't want to detect the attack after we've been attacked. And we also want early discovery of an attack. And what about hidden intrusions? We want to detect those. It's probably well known by now, but just in case you didn't know, I always ask my classes this, and more people actually know what the answer to this question is, but I'm going to ask you this question. How long does it take an average organization to discover that they have been compromised? You know, with some type of attack. They've been compromised. Somebody's hanging out in their database. Somebody has an APT running on several servers. How long does that take? What do you say? Well, I don't know if you're right or wrong, but whatever it was, it's over 200 days. It's about 204, 205 days on average for an organization to discover that they've been attacked. That is a long time, right? This is the better part of a year. And we're looking at the mean of a frequency distribution. We're looking at the average. So if you were to look at one edge of that frequency distribution, we see, of that bell curve, right? We see that one edge of it means that there are organizations that take a year or two or never find out that they have been compromised. So that detection, where it says rapid detection and early discovery, very, very important. So once we have an attack that we've discovered, we have a threat that we have found, the next part of the wheel in the bottom left quadrant there is to respond. So enhanced incident response, reduce the duration of the attack, suppress the impact of the attack. I've been attacked before on my own laptop or personal computer. I was on a personal computer once and going through some research, landed on a site that immediately popped up a glyph that said, FBI, you have been, and I immediately closed the browser and And I thought, you know what, that's too much. That's not enough. And I unplugged my computer, just unplugged it. I thought, you know what, if I'm going to get ransomware on my system, I'd rather the system crash because I unplugged it than have ransomware. And this is early ransomware, so it hadn't gotten around to running the encryption algorithm. And so by unplugging the system, and then I booted it into safe mode, and then in safe mode, I uninstalled all the browsers that I could uninstall and wiped everything from every browser, rebooted the system, and it was free and clear. Why? Well, because I had early detection of an attack. On a enterprise level, if you are at work and you get some type of alert on your phone and it says X type of attack might be happening, and you can immediately scroll to a mitigation or go to your office and run some type of mitigation, shut down your internet access, close ports, whatever it is, and stop the attack early, well then, you may have just saved the organization. Make sure you write it up in an email to your boss and ask for a raise. All right, so next thing we have is respond. Right, so respond, like I was saying, we actually got to respond before, and that's what I was talking about with the response to an attack, turning off the PC, blocking a port, deleting an account, something like that. And then recover, right? Rapid and efficient recovery, meet compliance, and prioritization of security investments. So we want to recover from that attack, making sure that we are back in compliance with any ISOs or any regulations that may have been compromised because of the attack. So these are some of the areas that we look at with threat intelligence. So with innovative TTPs used by threat actors, cybersecurity threats are becoming a major risk to any business sector. So it doesn't matter where you are. If you're in business, like in sales, or you are in medical, or you're in construction, it does not matter. There are so many different ways that your organization can be attacked. To thwart these threats, it's important for the organization to incorporate and leverage actionable threat intelligence to strengthen their security posture. One thing that somebody who is a CTIA should ask every morning is, how can I strengthen the security posture of this organization? We want to make sure that we have a continually strengthening security posture without compromising access for our customers and our employees. All right, so that takes us to the different types of threat intelligence. We have strategic and tactical. We have operational and technical. And there's a difference between all of these. Now, when you look at strategic versus tactical, strategic is like the long range. I always look at this in terms of militaries, right? So if you have a strategic plan, you look at the battlefield and you're looking at the overall overview, and over the next year or few months or whatever it is, we're going to take this objective, that objective, and we look at it as an overall long-range view. As you see here in the bullet point for strategic, it's a high-level information. We're looking at high-level information on changing risks. Right? So consumed by high-level executives and management. And they're ones, think of strategic as, looking out into the distance, looking at the overall lay of the land. Whereas tactical, it's information on the attacker's tactics, techniques, and procedures. And I look at tactical as being on the ground, right? So now, you are there with troops and with binoculars, and you say, well, see that? We need to take that right now. And so you have a plan that's for the next 5 minutes or for the next hour or something like that, right? So we're looking at specific techniques, and we're zooming in on those techniques. All right, versus operational and technical. So operational, again, is like strategic. We're looking at on what we do on a day-to-day basis for that organization. Operations, you might be familiar with operations. And so this is information on a specific incoming attack. So this is going to be managers and network defenders. We're looking at the type of attack. So for instance, this is where you look at the anatomy of an attack. Well, it starts with a scan, and then from there, if ports A, B, or C are open, of course they're not letters, but they're numbers, if these ports are open, then the next thing happens, and we look at the anatomy of the attack. Whereas technical, this is where all of the SOC staff, your IR teams, your incident response teams, these are the people who are actually going to be on the keyboards working to mitigate the attack, working on that. Blue team, red team people who are actually working on that. IT staff who do this type of technical work from day to day. So this is going to be specific indicators, specific ports, specific protocols, specific tools of compromise. So with strategic and tactical, we have more long-term. With operational technical, we have more short-term. With strategic and operational, it's more high-level. With technical and tactical, it's more low-level. So those are some of the different types of threat intelligence. Now, let's take a closer look at strategic threat intelligence. Now, remember, we're saying it's high-level regarding security posture of the organization. So we're looking at an overall, right? You can describe the security posture with, in some cases, few words compared to all the ports and protocols, procedures, machines, logins, etc., that are more technical, right? So few words comparatively. We're looking at the high-level information regarding threats, the impacts to business. And so this is the management level saying, you know what, if this area is compromised, we're going to lose X number of dollars per hour. If this area is compromised, it can cause us a loss of reputation. So we're looking at a very high level. All right, consumed by those executives, management of the organization. These are people who will go into meetings and show slideshows of what could possibly happen, communicate perhaps some of this to investors, things like that. It's going to be collected from sources like OSINT, CTI vendors, ISAOs and ISACs. These are going to be high-level organizations, like for instance organizations that give you your ISO certifications that are going to give you this information. It is generally in the form of a report that mainly focuses on high-level business strategies. So you'll have some type of high-level summary, business summary, where it shows you overall what's going on. And then from there, you'll have an outline. And then after the outline, you'll have all of the areas covered in a report. So it's used by management to take and make strategic decisions, analyze the effect of those decisions. So they're moving the chess pieces on that board. Right? They're not going to be sitting behind a keyboard coming up with a mitigation to a specific threat that was found when a specific port was parsed and a specific program was used or something like that. They're not going to be doing any of that. In fact, they don't even know how to do that. They're there to make sure that the business is covered on a strategic level. Now, let's take a closer look at the tactical level, tactical threat intelligence. Tactical threat intelligence provides information related to threat actors. These are TTPs that are used by threat actors to perform attacks. So we are now much lower level, right? We're looking specifically at what these threat actors are doing. How do they perform these attacks? What is it that's going on during these attacks? So with these threat actors, we are attempting to find out not only what they are doing, but second bullet point is it is consumed by cybersecurity professionals. So who are these people who are going to be looking at the tactical threat intelligence? These are going to be IT service managers, are going to be security operations managers, are going to be administrators, architects, So these are the people who are actually on the ground in IT looking at this. Mainly, though, management and administrators. Third bullet point for tactical threat intelligence. The collection sources for tactical threat intelligence, where we're going to get these. How are we going to find the information for tactical threat intelligence? Number one, campaign reports. So we're going to look at hack campaigns that have been conducted by threat actors, and we're going to look at those reports and find out how it worked, the anatomy of that attack. We're going to look at malware and find out what the malware is, how it works. We're going to look at incident reports on our own systems, and we're going to benchmark systems around the world to try to make sure that we understand that tactical threat. What about attack group reports and human intelligence? We're going to look at a wide variety of resources to get that tactical threat intelligence. Fourth bullet point, it's generated in the form of a forensics report that includes highly technical information, such as malware campaigns, techniques, tools, etc. So, for instance, this is not something that's going to be viewed by high-level management. A high-level manager doesn't need to know the actual mathematical technique that was used against a specific form of software that is at a specific revision level that has a specific issue that causes that software to be vulnerable to a specific type of attack. They don't care about that. They care that if the attack happens, which business unit it'll affect. So with tactical, we're looking at technical information. And the last bullet point on this slide, it helps the cybersecurity professional to understand how the adversaries are expected to perform the attack on the organization, the technical capabilities and goals of the adversaries, along with their attack vectors. So what we're saying is, who is it that's attacking us? And we want to know, not only knowing who it is will allow us to understand the attack, but will allow us to understand the motive for the attack, which will play into the way we defend from that attack. Now let's look a little bit deeper at operational threat intelligence. So in this case, it gives us information about specific threats against the organization. So in the pie chart of the multitudinous threats out there, we have a little slice that is the threats against this organization, against your organization. And so we're looking at those specific threats. So for instance, if there are threats against a Cisco infrastructure, and I don't have a Cisco infrastructure, then that's not going to apply to me. If it's threats against Microsoft Windows, and I'm an all Linux shop, then that's not going to apply to me. Unless, of course, my employees are bringing in those Windows laptops. It's another story there. So we want to see what applies to this specific organization. This is going to be, again, going back to the management level, heads of your incident response, network defenders, security forensics, your fraud detection teams are going to be the ones who get the operational threat intelligence. Where are we going to get this operational threat intelligence? This is going to come from information on the ground. What I mean by on the ground is I'm not going to go to a IT journal or a cybersecurity journal that came out with news last month and read about this. No, I'm going to get this from chat rooms, from social media, from humans. Again, humans, human intelligence. And I'm going to use that information, if it's credible, I'm going to have to actually make sure that I investigate to find out if it's credible. And if it is, act upon it. So that operational threat intelligence is going to come in the form of a report that contains identified malicious activities. So these are not proposed or supposed, these are identified. And also a recommended course of action, and then a look to the future to look at emerging attacks. It helps our organizations to understand possible threat actors along with intentions, capability, opportunity to attack. We want to make sure we understand our vulnerable IT assets, and if those vulnerable IT assets are attacked, what the impact of that attack will be if that attack is successful. Lastly, it helps IR and forensics teams to deploy security assets with the aim of identifying and stopping those upcoming attacks, improving the capability of detecting attacks at an early stage and reducing damage, right? So that those teams, specifically incident response and forensics, are going to need to look at that data and design methods to keep your organization safe from that type of attack. Next, we look at a deeper view of technical threat intelligence. What is it? Technical threat intelligence provides information about an attacker's resources, such as command and control channels, tools, etc., to perform the attack. And to understand this, the people who are dealing with technical threat intelligence need to have an understanding of the tools that will be used in that type of an attack. So what are their resources? Are they using some type of interpreter shell, or are they running some type of script using Nmap, or are they just perhaps there's a new type of tool that's been written in a raw language that was created by a specific attacker. We need to know that if possible. Who gets this information? Well, the IR teams, your SOC staff, and your security operations center, right? We want to make sure that that staff knows about this. And it is definitely a shorter lifespan compared to tactical. Why? Because we're looking at specific channels of attack, and these can be pretty ephemeral because the attacks come and go all the time. So shorter lifespan compared to tactical threat intelligence, and they mainly focus on specific indicators of compromise. So we're not looking at a broad view here. We're getting down to the actual tools, tactics, and techniques that are being used currently. The indicators of technical threat intelligence are collected from active campaigns, attacks that are performed on other organizations, or data feeds provided by external third parties. So these are organizations that are currently participating in forums or in other methods of sharing information while they are being attacked. I had some students that were working for a hospital, and the hospital came under attack by some threat actor. They weren't sure who it was. It took them quite a long time to dig out from the attack. But at that time, they could have been updating some type of blog or journal or even an internal resource that other hospitals could refer to and say, hey, you know what? That hospital over there is being attacked right now, and here's what they're finding. Let me make sure that I'm not vulnerable to that attack. So if it's happening right now, you are responding to it and reporting on it, then it is technical threat intelligence. All right, so technical threat intelligence is when it's happening right now. So, an example of technical threat intelligence. IP addresses. So, this hospital says we're being attacked, and these are some of the IP addresses that are attacking us. You're a hospital looking at that information. You're not currently being attacked, but you're saying, hey, I've got some technical threat intelligence from hospital A, and before it happens to me, I'm going to be blocking these IP addresses. So IP addresses is one example. A domain, right? This is coming from weattackyou.ru. It's a domain, and so as hospital B, I can block that domain before I get attacked because I have technical threat intelligence. So these are going to be used by malicious endpoints, maybe even phishing email. The hospital A in their blog, it says we got an email and we believe this is what started the attack. So Hospital B sends out information to users saying, don't answer this email, or they block that email with those types of phrases in it. Right? So with technical threat intelligence, we're looking at specific information, hash checksums, malware. We're looking at IP addresses and domains. And what it does is it improves detection mechanisms by adding identified indicators to the defensive systems like IDS, IPS, firewalls, endpoints, etc. So with that technical threat intelligence, we are updating our firewalls and endpoint security on the fly. So with threat intelligence generation, we have strategic, operational, tactical, and technical. Strategic is exposure for identified risk assessment. Operational looks at sensors. We filter to make sure that we understand the specific impact, and we put that into impact assessment. With tactical, we're looking at current investigations, TTP analysis. With technical, we're looking to identify active campaigns, IOCs. Right, so we're getting these threat feeds that we see on the left side of the slide, security analytics. We're processing that information, and we're using that for security, information, and event management. And as part of our threat intelligence platform, we're using that information to not only inform, but to take action against threats. Threat intelligence helps organizations to understand various aspects of the threat environment, such as the nature of the threats, identification of valuables, so that we can develop an appropriate security solution tailored to reduce the risk. So what that means is we want to make sure that we have a deep level of understanding of the various levels of threats. Let's look at the risk management process. We have been looking at it to a certain extent topically, but we'll look at it a little bit deeper in this section. So number one is the risk management process. What we see is it all revolves around FRAME. That is threat intelligence used to understand the direction and operation needed to perform risk management. So what we're looking at here is operations. We're looking at the direction that we want to take depending on all of the other points and processes for risk management. So next one we have is, well, we'll start with the top here, which is assess. Right, so we want to identify, assess, and track threats and vulnerabilities. And that assessment is going to be directly related to the direction that we're going to take with operations, right? So that's, again, back to FRAME. But assess is also going to be related to respond, and that is used to evaluate courses of action. So we're going to do something, right, once we identify the risk. And again, that response is going to be directly related back to the direction and operations that we're going to need to perform our risk management. And that response is going to be directly related back to our assessment, where we are constantly tracking potential and novel threats. But it's going to also be part of monitoring those threats, which is going to give us a real-time look at what's going on in order to support decisions, real-time decisions, and practices. Again, that relates directly back to framing, because that's going to change our operations direction and back to assessment. And so this entire risk management process is intertwined with threat intelligence so that we can decide where we want to go on a continual basis. So now we look at the integration of threat intelligence into SIEM. SIEM, Security Information and Event Management, is a very important part of IT because it protects the assets of the organization from data breaches that have happened because of external and internal threats. So data breaches are one of the worst types of breaches that we can have, because not only does it compromise the system itself, but the data is exposed, and that data could be everything from usernames to passwords to social security numbers to credit card numbers, etc. So organizations are going to integrate threat intelligence into security information and event management in order to take control of chaos. Right? We want to make sure that we don't just have a chaotic environment, rather we gain in-depth knowledge of the threats, get rid of false positives, false negatives, and implement proactive intelligence-driven defense. And so intelligence-driven defense means that our defense is based upon what we know and understand, not just in general. So we want to have that intelligence-driven defense. So what are some of the benefits of integrating cyber threat intelligence into your security information and event management? Number one, helps you to thwart evolving threats. We want that to be very important. Number two, real-time support for our SOC analysts. Number three, enhance the effectiveness of threat detection mechanisms. We want to make sure that we're focusing on the right thing and we tune those tools to give us the lowest rate of false positive and negatives. Number four, to provide contextual information that speeds up triage of alerts and incident investigation. So what we want to do is when we have an alert, act on it immediately and not have anything sitting in any bucket waiting for a response while the system is completely compromised. Number five, enhance threat tracking by combining internal monitoring logs with external and internal threat intelligence. So we look at, for instance, Event Viewer on a server, and we take that information and we run it against known threats to find out what's going on. So we look at the specific logs or syslog or whatever types of logs you're looking at. And number six, verify historical data against current threat intelligence to uncover unknown threats. Right? We want to turn those unknown unknowns into known knowns. Next, we want to leverage threat intelligence for enhanced incident response. So with threat intelligence, what we want to do is we want to integrate our incident response process in order to help our incident response teams to have the resources that they need to act against incidents quickly. We don't want the incident response team stalled for lack of information or lack of resources. Some of those resources involve information that's been already previously gathered or is currently being gathered. Other resources involve having the correct tools to respond to the incident. And then the other resource would be to have the correct procedures to respond to incidents. Also, that threat intelligence helps to identify the W's, I was saying before, who, what, when, where might be performing the attack. We want to know how the attack has been conducted, how it's operating, what campaigns that this attack might be part of, because it might be part of a wider campaign, and where else to search on the network for information on this attack. Let's talk about the phases of escalation that are involved in incident response management. Phase one is pre-planning, and there's always that saying, he who fails to plan plans to fail. So we want to make sure that we have a plan. So using CTI, security analysts can find out answers to some of the questions that we're going to need for that pre-planning, including which hacker groups would target the organization and what are the reasons behind it. So obviously there are going to be different hacker groups that are going to target a government organization versus a banking organization versus, for instance, a healthcare organization. So there are going to be different groups. We need to characterize and analyze these groups. Next, which are the different assets they are targeting? It could be anywhere from a customer database to passwords, to getting information on credit cards, etc. What are the various capabilities the adversaries possess? So if you're dealing with nation states, the capabilities are going to be much higher than dealing with script kiddies on another level, on another part of an organization. And then what are the possible attack scenarios? Is your organization web-driven? So let's say that all of your commerce comes to purchases on your website. That's a lot different than if you have retail outlets and all of your commerce comes through a point of sale at your retail outlet. So where are the attacks going to come from? What are the possible attack scenarios? We find these out, we put together a map of the pre-planning and make sure we're ready for different types of attacks. The next thing we look at is phase 2, which is the event. So with operational and tactical threat intelligence, we help provide context to the alerts that might be generated because of our security incident and events management and our SOC, or Security Operations Center, and all of the tools that we have as a part of that. So they're going to generate alerts, and we want to put together the context for these alerts. So for instance, you may have a specific signature that keeps showing up. The context is that there is a broader attack by a specific group that we have determined already in our pre-planning phase. So having that broader context really helps. The next thing we look at is the information can be used to determine an event that can escalate into a security incident. So at the footprinting phase, where the attacker is gathering information, if we can stop the attack at that point, then we're a lot better off than having to do triage after the attack has already begun. So that's phase 1, pre-planning. Phase 2, the event. Phase 3 is the incident. So after an incident has taken place in the network, it's already happened, we have operational threat intelligence that can be used by our security analysts to gain more insight into the techniques that were used for the incident, the operations that took place, the actors, objectives, past incidents, etc. So we can gain insight to that incident, and then the threat intelligence helps us to get knowledge about the threat using the threat triangle that we talked about a little while ago, that gives us the information about that actor's capability, intent, and opportunity. So what we want to do is frame this incident so that we understand the incident in the larger context and not as an isolated event. So that's the incident. Then phase 4 is breach, much worse than an incident. And let me just back up to phase 3 a little bit and talk about what an incident is. An incident may not involve a breach. An incident can be anything from a port scan to a specific type of attack signature, but it may not have been successful. It may have just flagged itself on as you scan your systems, as you're monitoring your systems. It may have been flagged, however, it may not be a breach. So don't think of an incident at the same level of importance as a breach, but know that an incident can immediately rise to the level of a breach if not dealt with immediately. So for a breach in phase 4, an organization considers it essential to report an incident when it escalates to a breach. So we see that we have now a breach, and a breach means that there's some part of the organization that has been violated. For instance, files have been accessed from a third party that shouldn't have been. For instance, a third party has gained access to the network. A security protocol has been broken. A rule that the organization has been violated in some way. We now have a breach. So we have strategic and operational threat intelligence that help us to define when it happened and what happened. And there's another area with incidences and breaches that needs to be categorized also is who and what criteria determine that this is an incident or that this is a breach. And this is something that your organization will need to predetermine ahead of time so that that bar can be raised or lowered depending upon your organization. But we want to know what happened. We want to know how and what was the reason behind the breach and any steps that can be taken to avoid any type of breach like this in the future. Anything from tightening down our information systems using multiple factor authentication to isolating systems in another network, etc. Now we want to enhance incident response by establishing SOPs for threat intelligence. We want to make sure that the organization has standard operating procedures, and we want to make sure that any of the organization's employees and anyone who's working directly with systems needs to intimately understand those SOPs so that they'll be able to bring them to bear when an incident occurs. So threat intelligence usually consists of indicators of threats, like for instance, IP addresses, URLs, domain names, malware hashes, file names. These are some of those indicators we were talking about earlier. And these SOPs, our standard operating procedures, help us to improve that response. So for instance, if I know that if there is A type of response or B type of response, then I use SOP X or SOP Y to counter or respond to that specific type of incidents. So I need to know exactly what type of response I need to do. And if it's not categorized, there should be an SOP for non-categorized incidents also. So for IP addresses, which network devices are more critical than others? So if there was a threat or incident or some other type of activity involving a specific IP address that belongs to an IoT device, what type of IoT device was it and what type of response would be required for that IoT device? Like for instance, if it was an IoT camera and that IoT camera was a camera that is focused in an area that has information that I do not want to have access, then perhaps that's something that needs to be responded to right away, whereas you have another device where it's not as important because of that IP address. Is there a specified way to determine if those critical devices are sending or receiving traffic to or from that specific IP address? So can we monitor the network and follow that IP traffic? Is there any documented process that can assist in performing such types of research? Are there tools that the incident management team has at their disposal to track that? There should be. Does the organization have in-depth understanding of security technology to carry out research under pressure? And this is a reason that we have red teams and blue teams, so that we can simulate those types of attacks and the response so that when an employee is under pressure, they'll know exactly what to do and how to act instead of sort of freaking out and locking up. I don't know what to do. Something's happening. I'm being attacked. And instead say, oh, I've seen this one before, and immediately go to the appropriate level of action to counter whatever is happening. That's why we drill these things. We want to make sure that our actions are natural and our responses are quick and correct. So domain names. Does the security analyst have the capability to view and monitor domain traffic? If not, why not? And if they don't have the ability to monitor that traffic, those specific analysts, what about others? Does someone else have the capability of monitoring that traffic? And if so, maybe the SOP for one set of analysts would be to hand it over to another set of analysts. Does the security analyst have the capability to view the Whois database for the domains and information regarding registrations? Is there documented processes that can assist in performing those types of research? Does the organization have in-depth understanding of the security technologies to carry out research under pressure? Again, all of this needs to be something that is elucidated in SOPs and practiced and war gamed so that whether it is a domain name or an IP address, we're able to act in a way that helps preserve the network even under pressure. What about URLs? Is it possible for the security analyst to view suspicious URLs and the end users who visited them? Most organizations have at the edge of the network some type of capability of monitoring all of the traffic into and out of the organization so that they can control access to the types of sites that are allowed by employees and that are not allowed by employees. And because of that, they have the ability to track exactly which URLs were accessed and which weren't. And in the case of an organization that does not have that capability, it needs to be installed so that we can trace back. So here's one of the most important things, and this has helped in so many investigations before, where there's a worm or a virus that is, or some other type of malware that is on a host on the system, and that malware will make a call out to a specific URL or set of URLs, a specific IP address or set of IP addresses, and we need to be able to capture that traffic so we can characterize what that malware is attempting to do. Malware hashes and file names. Can that security analyst view the endpoints for specific file names of malware hashes that exist on any of the endpoints? We want to be able to follow not only the contact between hosts and malware and specific URLs and or IP addresses, but we also want to have the ability to look at specific file names that are being accessed. Okay, so let's look at some scenarios using threat intelligence. All right, the first scenario, here's the challenge. You have an employee. The employee receives an email from his mom. Oh, emails from mom, how wonderful. However, the email contains an attachment that's rather suspicious. What do? Let's start with the analysis. And one thing I want to do is to go back before we do the analysis. We want to have trained our users to be aware of emails that have suspicious attachments like this. Otherwise, we would like to catch that email before it gets to the user because it's been trapped by our threat system. So let's look at the analysis. So this email was detected as fraudulent and forwarded to the incident response team. So either our anti-malware system, our email anti-malware, or the user themselves somehow forwarded this to the IR team. The incident response team performed a detailed analysis of the email, the attachment, and the infected payload that was part of the attachment. And there are many tools. This is part of a greater area called malware analysis. Next, the analysis yielded several data points: the subject of the email, the file name of the attachment, for instance, an MS Word document, the IP address that was used to send the email. There may be other information, for instance, if this email was sent from specific sources, if it matched specific signature types. Then we go to the incident response team, then fed the data points into their intelligence, their threat intelligence platform. This turned up information about a threat actor whose preferred method was to send spear phishing emails to targets. So spear phishing emails, we're looking for specific targets that we want to conduct fraudulent activity with. We want to get information from specific targeted emails, usually from people who are high earners. Given that intelligence, the incident response team searched the email logs for those suspicious file names, and by doing so identified other spear phishing email to other employees. Then they investigated the other employee machines that received those emails with the other file names, but did not find any traces that the emails had been opened. And this could be the result of the fact that you have an educated staff, and that staff saw the suspicious email and asked the question, does my mom usually email me at work? Does my mom spell words weirdly? Would my mom ever use a title like this or a subject line like this? And decided that the word attachment and the email was suspicious and didn't open it. That's great, because in many cases, all it takes is one person to open that email to infect an entire network. In this case, the result is that by using threat intelligence to identify the source of the campaign, the incident response team followed the most direct path to remediation, not only for the original email, but for the other spear phishing emails from the same adversary. And because they used this approach, they avoided the need to conduct a full company-wide incident response search across the whole network, ultimately reducing cost and saving time. And as a follow-through to this analysis, the incident response team might recommend to the rest of the IT team that emails of this type that follow this pattern need to be quarantined and or blocked. All right, now let's look at another challenge. So this one is when the recipient of a suspicious email questioned the sender about its contents and authenticity. It raised the alarm about a potential cyber threat at a large company. Right? So again, somebody receives an email. This happens so often. It's one of the main vectors for attack. And what they did is they questioned the sender. This can have various results depending on the type of email that is there. Now we have a company-wide alarm. So the analysis. The incident response team arrived at the client's site and discovered that an employee's machine was infected with malware and was sending out emails to everyone in the address book. Do you know anyone to whom this has happened? Have you received emails from a friend of yours and right away knew that their machine was infected? I've had that happen many times. Or I get a text from somebody and then I text them back saying, did you send the previous text? And they will respond usually, no, I didn't send that. Sorry, thank you. I think I'm infected, or something to that effect. So often the user doesn't even know this happened. So the second bullet point under analysis is that the response team captured the unique signature of the malware by applying a hash function to a sample of the infected code and then checked that signature within the threat intelligence platform, found a match, learned from the platform how the malware works and what the capabilities of the malware are. This revealed that the malware, after installing itself on the victim's machine, spreads itself by sending emails, which is kind of obvious, but you never know, could be doing other things, sending emails to other users based upon the sender's address book. So we're able to see what this malware does just by getting a code hash and comparing it to a hash database. And as a result, the incident response, drawing upon threat intelligence, delivers the fastest and most effective method for neutralizing and finding other threats within the environment. Furthermore, by using threat intelligence to identify the adversary's other modes of attack, the incident response team can perform a more thorough job protecting clients. So in this case, we didn't get out as easy as the first scenario. Why? Well, because the machine was actually infected and sending out emails to other machines. But because of a quick response, one that had probably been war-gamed in the past, the email was able to be stopped and the attack mitigated in the end. So what do organizations and analysts expect? Well, it's important for the organization to make sure that they have timely and accurate intelligence so they can be prepared for any breach. One of the areas of constant activity is that anybody who's involved in cybersecurity should always be looking out for the latest threats. Be subscribed to the appropriate news groups to make sure that as new evolving threats happen, that the cybersecurity professional is on the case and already knows about it. It should be the rare occasion where you meet somebody and they say, hey, have you heard about this threat? And you haven't heard about it. You should have already heard about it because of the types of information that you ingest on a daily, yes, hourly basis to know what's going on in the larger world. So we need timely and accurate intelligence. What else do organizations and analysts expect? They need to identify the motive behind the human behavior that affects security of the organization. You know, there are attacks where the motive is clear. The motive is, I want to hold your files ransom and collect some type of money from you. That's very clear. Or, I want to stop your organization from being able to work. But some attacks are somewhat random. Why in the world does somebody make this worm or this virus? The more we know about the reason behind the attack, the more we can anticipate where the attack is going to go, what it's going to do, and what we can anticipate in the future for this type of attack. Also, an analyst would expect, or an organization, to utilize the threat intelligence to get information on the adversary, the behavioral characteristics, the motive, what are the adversary's TTPs, who are the possible threat actors, and are they dramatically changing the TTPs and why? So these are things we want to know. We want to gather as much intelligence about this type of attack as much as possible. Well, in order for there to be a cogent response to any given type of cybersecurity threat, we want to make sure that we have an appropriate organization in place, not only to be able to respond to specific threats, but to design and maintain organizational standards and practices that will help to make sure these types of attacks don't happen, and that when they do, they are responded to and closed down immediately. If you do not have the appropriate organization, then you are making your organization vulnerable to various types of attacks. Let's have a look at the organization that's required to make sure you're ready. All right, so at the top of the organization, we have the CISO. The CISO is at the same level as the CEO, the CIO, the CFO, the C-class of your organization. The CISO is going to be responsible for governance and compliance, for security engineering, security operations, for cyber threat intelligence, that's where we are, and for vulnerability management. And now all of these roles for which the CISO is responsible may be rolled into one or several managers at another level underneath the CISO. But either way, they need to be able to have an organizational structure that has all these important pieces to be able to build an organization that can respond to threats. If you look at intelligence-driven decision making, this is fed by the organizational security goals, and then that goes into cyber threat intelligence up to the CISO, CIO, from where we will perform a risk analysis, and that risk analysis will determine the decisions that are going to be made in the organization. So let me give you a scenario where not having the appropriate organization can cause vulnerabilities. So let's say that we have a person who is an IT administrator. So they administer servers, they set up new Active Directory domains, they integrate Linux services with Active Directory services. And this person, in reviewing the security of the organization, decides that there is a clear and present danger to the organization. This person then attempts to put into the organization, put that fix into the organization to make sure that that security is addressed. And let's say the fix that he's addressing requires two-factor authentication for certain types of employees. And that two-factor authentication will require modifying the directory services structure of the organization, and it will require budget to purchase the actual physical artifacts of two-factor authentication. And then this person will have to give the key or whatever it is to the employees that are required to have two-factor authentication. Well, let's say that all of that is available, but because the two-factor authentication is a hassle for those employees, they don't want to participate in it, and they talk to their manager, who talks to the IT workers manager, who eventually is told to stop with this project, and they pull back the two-factor authentication. Well, let's look at it another way. Let's say that the IT person, the system administrator, knew that there was a correct method to introduce new security protocols into the organization. They discovered that there was an authentication issue and put that into an already existing method for informing management. This makes its way up to the CISO, who pushes it down to the rest of management, and then the employee has the project to implement the two-factor authentication, and then the employees that are going to be using the second factor of authentication, like a card key or a dongle or whatever it is, if they feel that it is an inconvenience, when they talk to their manager will already have been informed by the CISO and that structure all the way from the top that this is the new way of doing things, and that new two-factor authentication will stay in the organization. So when there is already a way to integrate changes and adaptability into the system, then it makes it much easier for those changes to stay in effect, and as new ones come about, for them to be able to be used. So we actually need to have the appropriate organizational structure. So it would be a good idea not just to have an IT system administrator who sees to and responds to threats, but their primary job is administering the system. Better yet, why not have a cyber threat analyst? What is this cyber threat analyst going to be doing? Number one, collecting up-to-date and accurate data from the dark web, from intelligence feeds and sources. So they're dipped into information constantly to make sure they know what in the world is around the corner in terms of security threats. Next, we want them to analyze the collected data and understand the technical aspects of security. So a cyber threat analyst will have the technical capabilities of a system administrator, network administrator, and beyond. So they need to understand those threats. Next, to identify business risks, refine that information into intelligence. This is something that we can take that intelligence and put it into a system that can help us to deal with risks and threats. And then we take that intelligence also, not only do we put it down the chain into a system that will help us mitigate risks, but we send it up the chain also to higher level business executives so that changes can be made from the top down. Next, we identify, monitor, assess, and defend against various attacks performed by both external and internal threat actors. So the cyber threat analyst is going to be monitoring the system a lot more than any system or network administrator will, because a system or network administrator's primary job is to administer the network, or administer the servers, or administer the virtual structure or the cloud, the private cloud. But a cybersecurity analyst's primary job is going to be to analyze threats and make sure that we understand those threats, we have actionable intelligence, and that we can actually create appropriate rules and change our system in response Next, we want to stay ahead of the adversary by understanding the latest TTPs. We want to make sure we understand the tactics, the techniques, and the procedures that go with this attack. In many cases, understanding TTPs means that you have rehearsed the attack yourself. So for instance, if you have an organization that has a red team and a blue team, or maybe a purple team, or you can draw from for both sides, that you have taken the tactics and techniques, gone over the procedures, and used them to attack either VMs of your organization or systems like your organization, or actually the organization, to make sure that you understand exactly how those attacks unfold. So you have to understand the latest techniques, tactics, and procedures. Next, we extract threat intelligence, including contextual information of IOCs, TTPs, consequences, actionable intelligence about evolving threats. And one thing I want to focus on here is consequences. An area that I've seen go either way is the idea of malware that's used to cryptographically seal your files and then offer a ransom for them. That's called ransomware. Two major responses that you've probably seen in the news. One is to pay to get the data back, and the other is not to pay and to rebuild your system from scratch. And so that is what we talk about when we talk about consequences. So for instance, if I find out that the tactics, techniques, and procedures of a specific ransomware campaign are to lock a specific class of files using a specific type of algorithm, I might know and find out that there is a key to unlocking the files myself, so I don't have to pay. Or in anticipation of that specific set of TTPs for the ransomware, I may already have a method of backup that allows me to just delete that class of files, remove the ransomware, and then reinstall or reinstantiate those files. So knowing that contextual information, tactics, techniques, and procedures, consequences allow us to make a potential response. And therefore, in the midst of the storm, under the ransomware attack, your organization can confidently move forward through the attack because they already know how to respond. Next, we look at understanding the motive of the adversary by analyzing the characteristics and habits of threat actors. And some motives are actually hidden inside other motives. So for instance, the motive might seem like some type of a gag, right? So it makes something funny dance on the machine, or it does something that seems innocuous. But underneath that, what it's doing is it's setting up a botnet. And that's the ultimate purpose. And in order to find out what the ultimate goals of the adversary are, you need to have studied that adversary, understanding the characteristics, habits of those threat actors. Next, guide your organization in building effective defense and mitigation strategies so that any type of attack that occurs, you have a defense. Any type of breach that occurs, you have a mitigation strategy. And lastly, to collaborate with IT, incident handling, and SOC teams by generating timely reports. The cyber threat analyst needs to know how to communicate in writing. Because these reports that the cyber threat analysts are going to use are going to be sent to people up and down the management chain and be dispersed fairly widely. So you have an organization, you have system administrators, network administrators, and help desk teams, but you have no cyber threat analyst. What do? How do you start? One way that I've seen organizations use is to take one of your IT staff who's capable and interested in that position and start with dividing the role until your organization can put together the appropriate budget structure to have that job be a standalone role. But meanwhile, you can divide it out. But in doing so, you'll need to very clearly make sure you understand and the employee understands the expectations of that role and have their other duties lessened so that they can perform this role. Or wait until you have the budget cycle and then hire into this role. So there are ways that you can make sure that you have this position, but it's a very important position. Threat intelligence use cases. Let's talk about some use cases for threat intelligence. The first one we look at is alarms, events, and alerts prioritization. So what we want to do is always prioritize the level of threats because we don't want a stream of just information. We want actionable threats. Number 2, incident response. Threat intelligence solutions help the IR team, your forensics team, threat detection group to analyze the context of threats more quickly and easily. And our response needs to be an area, incident response needs to be an area of your organization that is well documented and well rehearsed. Next, we look at investigation and mitigation as one of the use cases for threat intelligence. And this helps your incident response team and your security teams to uncover the effects of related threats and help prevent network damage. So that's the mitigation aspect of it. We can also use threat intelligence for fusion analysis. And so what we do is we create a more complete picture of threats and risks posed by an attack to the organization, where intelligence is gathered from different sources, and we take those disparate sources and fuse them into a single threat report, right? That's fusion analysis. All right, let's look at our next section, which is an overview of threat intelligence, its life cycle, and frameworks. We're going to look at the life cycle for threat intelligence, the role of the threat analyst in this life cycle, strategy and capabilities. We're going to look at capabilities to look for in a specific threat intelligence solution if you're trying to purchase one for your organization. We're going to look at the threat intelligence maturity model and frameworks. All right, let's start with the threat intelligence life cycle. So if we look at the upper right quadrant, number 1, we have planning. We always start with planning. I've worked with many employees in the past and many organizations that want to go immediately into implementation. Hey, I heard a solution, let's just install it. But no, we need to plan first and foremost, define what our requirements are going to be, make a plan, form a team, an intelligence team. And when you form this team, make sure that you have a definition of who and the capabilities that you want on the team, how often they're going to meet, and for how long they're going to meet on each meeting. Define it very carefully. Send requests for data collection. So we want to find out what type of data we want, and then we send requests to have that data collected. Plan and set requirements for the other phases that we're going to talk about. So planning, having the direction set, is number 1 and extremely important. And then before we go forward, we are going to go into the collection phase, which we'll talk about a little bit more in depth as we go through this section. We collect the data that satisfies our intelligence goals, which we have elucidated in planning and direction. We collect from resources including OSINT, HUMINT, IMINT, MANSINT, etc. There are so many different types of intelligence that we can gather. We'll look at some of these, like I said, a little bit later. Next is processing and exploitation. We process the raw data for exploitation. We convert that data into a usable format so that we can analyze it. So that's step number 3. Step number 4 in the threat intelligence life cycle. We want to make sure we have analysis and production as part of that life cycle. So we combine the information from phase 3 into a single entity, get facts, findings, forecasts, The analyst should be objective, timely, accurate, and actionable. And this is why the security analyst needs to be a separate role, so we have more objectivity for that role. And then lastly, we want to perform confidence-based analysis. So a confidence-based analysis is going to be a mathematically and statistically correct analysis of the data that we've collected. Lastly, in step 5, or phase 5 that we might say, is to deliver intelligence to the intended consumers at different levels. So we have we talked about this before. We have our strategic, tactical, operational, technical. Strategic being the high-level business strategies, TTPs for tactical, operational for specific threats, and IOCs for technical. So let's talk about the role of the threat analyst in the threat intelligence life cycle. So we have collection, right, where we have look at those feeds and internal and external resources, IOCs, malware reports, etc. I've talked about that already. We have processing and exploitation, where we get that data and index it and filter it, and we structure it. We have analysis and production, where we integrate and evaluate and analyze the data and get it ready for courses of action. And we have dissemination and integration, where we send out those reports to strategic and tactical customers, also to operational and technical consumers. So consumers are going to be our customers, and not necessarily the people who are buying stuff from us, but they're people to whom we are required to give a service, internal to our organization or external to our organization. So all of that information is going to need to be disseminated to them. So what about strategy? The organizations develop the intelligence strategy based upon their business requirements and their risk level. So really, those two are going to drive our strategy, specifically risk level. These both work together. So for instance, you might have a business requirement that says that you will be up 5 nines or 6 nines, so 99.999% of the time, or 99.9999% of the time, or I don't know if I put too many nines in there or not, but either way, that might be your business requirement. And that business requirement is going to fit directly into risk level, because you want to apply those nines to the system that has the highest risk. So for instance, if this system goes down and we lose one of those nines, and we're at 4 nines this quarter, then you're losing money, or you have some other type of business exposure. So business requirements and risk levels really work together. And those risk levels, again, are assigned based upon what your organization can stand to lose or not stand to lose. So the components that are going to be considered while developing that strategy for your intelligence are, number 1, the threat intelligence requirement analysis. Right? So we're going to analyze that threat intelligence. Intelligence and collection planning. So we want to, again, plan for the future. Also, we have asset identification. If you want to, you can circle asset identification and draw a direct line and circle risk level. Because in many cases, those assets, be they programmatic or physical assets, are going to relate directly to your risk. So for instance, here is our database of all of our most important data ever. We can't afford for it to go down, so that's a very high risk level. Therefore, I'm going to put a lot of energy and money to protecting that asset. Next is threat reports, keeping track of those, knowing exactly what types of threats might be around the corner. Number 5 is threat trending. Look at the graphs, see what's happening with threats, and know if you need to start getting ready to defend against that in your organization. And then intelligence buy-in. If we have intelligence information to give to management or to other concerned parts of our organization, they need to buy into that, because we don't want the intelligence reports to be a report that gets filed immediately in the round file once the report lands on the desk, or to get deleted immediately or just left unopened in the email feed because there's no buy-in. So we need buy-in for that report, that intelligence strategy. So we have threat intelligence requirement analysis and intelligence and collection planning. For requirement analysis, this plays an important role in obtaining good quality information for your organization, for making sure that information is relevant, for avoiding the chance that you have irrelevant information, making that report a waste of time. Again, that goes back to what we were talking about before, buy-in. We want to make sure that any type of threat assessment or reporting is immediately applicable and important for our organization. And then in the collection and planning, we want to meet our intelligence requirements and prioritize those according to the decision makers that are going to be getting that information. Also, for threat intelligence strategy, we look at asset identification. I mentioned that earlier as it involves risk, right? So an organization has to plan for classifying the assets based upon the criticality of that asset, and then identify those, and from that criticality we can make a risk level for that asset. Threat reports. We want statistics. We want research, and we want to take that research and those statistics and put together a cogent report for all of the involved parties. Threat trending. We want to plan for the future. And this is an area that takes a little bit of imagination. Looking at technologies that are currently getting ready to become potentially threat makers, I guess you could put it that way. So for instance, some technologies like AI, or narrow AI, or quantum computation, or if you look at building political movements in other countries, things like that, we look at that to say, hey, what's possibly going to happen in the future, so that we can plan our security posture. And then, like we said, intelligence buy-in, we need to gain buy-in from higher management to implement a strategy. And with this, there should be a structure that allows that buy-in to occur more easily. So for instance, I've had situations where I am using an information system of a company. And the company, usually it's online on a website, or sometimes it's at a point of sale, and there is a failure in their information processing. And I would like that company to be able to implement or at least listen to my complaint. But normally, if you talk to somebody, whatever you have to say just goes nowhere. And so before telling that person about my complaint or about my suggestion, I will ask them if they have a method in place where customer suggestions can be automatically processed and put in. Normally I'll ask if they have some type of program for that. And usually they'll say they don't. And if they say they don't, then I don't give them a suggestion because it won't go anywhere. It'll go to that person's ears or be an unflagged, unread email. So I'll ask them if they have any type of management system that helps them to capture that information. Similarly, in your organization, you need to have some type of system that will allow intelligence, threats, reports, information along those lines to get to the correct people and actually be reviewed. So that's part of buy-in. We want to make sure that we have the ability to get approval and buy-in for our threat intelligence. What about the capabilities for threat intelligence? Organizations need to have capabilities to be able to execute and manage any newly developed threat intelligence strategies. So here are some components that are required to meet capabilities. Number one, incident response. We've talked about this a lot. The IR team should be in place to handle security incidents that have occurred, reducing the risk of asset damage. Now, I've seen in some of my customers or employers both good and bad examples of this, where there was no incident response and an incident occurred that put the organization at risk. In other areas, I've seen where the organization has a very well developed and rehearsed incident response policy and or incident response team, and when an incident occurred, they're able to very quickly reduce exposure for the organization by jumping on that incident immediately. So incident response next is an automated response. Develop an automated incident response system to avoid delay in handling an incident. So if you can categorize the incidents enough for your system to automatically respond, the more automated response, the better, because it's immediate. Also, you need to have an intelligence architecture that's been developed for incident detection and response. You're not going to have an automated response without an intelligent architecture, right? So we need to have both of those. And then an indicator of compromise so that the organization can detect compromise immediately and respond to it. We don't want to be one of those 200-day organizations. We want to be an organization that responds immediately. So let's look at some capabilities to look for. You are, in this course, you're thinking, you know what, we need to do better in our organization. In fact, I want to make sure that I have a good threat intelligence solution. You can't monitor all this yourself like we were talking about earlier. You need to make sure that you have a solution ready to go. So let's talk about some of the areas to look for, some of the capabilities to look for in a threat intelligence solution. Number one, automation. So we want two types of automation. Number one, built-in automation. So with built-in automation, I can have a system that once it's implemented, and a lot of these systems have multiple layers of implementation. But once it's implemented, there'll be many, many different categories and classes of built-in automation for security, threat responses, etc. Secondarily is programmatic. So we want to be able to build a programmatic response, build in our own automation. And in many solutions, there are APIs that will allow us to use our own programming infrastructure and add to that. Number two, provide informed analysis and prediction. So we want to make sure that we're able to analyze any type of threat and predict where it's going, what's going to happen. Number three, create personalized content. We want to take this threat intelligence solution and personalize it. In many of these solutions, you can personalize the messages that are sent, any emails that are sent from the solution to users with personal logos and messages, and also personalize the response to specific threats more than they are out of the box. Number four, deliver significant insights. So when you drill down, you want to be able to get very detailed information about that aspect of whatever threat it's analyzing. Number five, disseminate understandable intelligence. And so this will be able to take input from disparate sources and allow you to send that out and disseminate it to whoever needs it. Number six, integrate with security controls. So we have multiple security controls at multiple parts of our network and hosts and virtualization systems, etc. And we want whatever we're using as a current solution to be able to integrate with our threat intelligence solution. Number seven, enhance patch management. One of the most important areas for securing a network or management system is patch management. And most organizations will already have a patch management solution around, but a good threat intelligence solution will either work with your current patch management or have its own patch management that you can use. So you'll be able to either use your own patch management in concert with the threat intelligence solution, or switch over to the threat intelligence solution itself to do patch management. Many organizations use a hodgepodge of patch management. So for instance, you might use Microsoft's patch management solution for all your desktops and some of your servers, and you might use another third-party solution for all your Linux servers and services, and you might use a different solution for something else. And you might find a nice threat intelligence solution that has better patch management, and it can go across the board. That's something to look for. So, number 8, prioritize events and provide contextual awareness. So not only do we want a priority as to the severity of the event, but we also want contextual awareness. For instance, an event occurs on an edge router, but the event signature says that that's the beginning of an attack against my database servers from an external source. So I have contextual awareness. Event number whatever occurred against edge router whatever, this event is indicative of a precursor to a database attack. So I know what the context is. Number 9, detect and fix security incidents. And this goes right with number 1, automation. We want to be able to automate any type of security incidents that we detect. And that type of remediation, that type of automation is extremely important in the ever-increasing types of threats that we're facing. Number 10, pivot on a single indicator and find related events. This is what we were talking about in number 8, where we had that indicator of an edge incident, and we were able to see that, hey, this might point to an attack on a database server. So pivot on that indicator, try to find what it could be. Number 11, capable of building new protections and preventing evolving threats. So in other words, I have this threat intelligence solution and it does all this great stuff, but I cannot add to it. I can't build into it responses for new types of threats. You want to be able to have that capability to deal with anything new that happens. Number 12, the ability to extract high-value, actionable intelligence. And so this would be intelligence that we'd be able to take and put into a report. This would also dovetail into the ability to generate very good reports. We want reports that can be put into a structure that will allow us to edit them and personalize them. So let's look at the threat intelligence maturity model. So there are levels of threat intelligence applicability in an organization. We can see how much an organization is secure from emerging threats. So this is, let's start with maturity level 0. Vague. It's vague. We don't know where to start. We don't have anything really going on. I find maturity level 0 in a lot of small to smaller medium-sized businesses. They have no idea where to start. And so they're wide open to a lot of threats. It's all random and haphazard. Maturity level 1, preparing for CTI. So we can filter and aggregate threat intelligence, consume it, use tactical threat intelligence to enhance endpoint security, use SEIM to correlate internal data with our external feeds. So we're correlating, we're actually consuming threat intelligence data. But in maturity level 2, we increase our CTI capabilities, generating actionable threat intelligence, automating it. So that's another big deal, right? In maturity level 2, we are actually into automation. We're also doing the W's, right? Describing who, what, why, and how aspects for specific threats. We're expanding the threat knowledge by joining communities. So we actually have people in our organization who are members of communities to keep an eye on the latest types of threats, understanding IOCs, and converting data into knowledge. Maturity level 3, we have a CTI program in place. All right, that's actually at least where we have an actual program in place. So we have established our processes and workflows. Very important to have already worked out how your workflows are going to work with getting the appropriate action completed and information sent to the appropriate entities. Generate strategic and tactical TI. Integrate TI with endpoint security devices like we were talking about before, SCIM, ID, IPS, firewalls, etc. We want to make sure all of our devices can take that threat intelligence and integrate it into action. Use TI to support incident response activities. So we take the threat intelligence and immediately we are using it to get ready for incident response. Maturity level 4 is a well-defined CTI program, efficient, matured, generating, consume strategic and tactical TI, assist in proactive threat hunting. We're looking for threats before they come to us. We're hunting those threats. Use TI to define security processes and architectures. So we're taking the latest threat intelligence, we're working them into our evolving architectures, and then changing those architectures, and then automating those architectures to be able to respond to the latest type of threat. You know, there is one thing that we hear a lot in the news is what types of threats became attacks and exposed organizations' information or other types of hacks. We hear that on the news. What we don't hear is all the hundreds of thousands of, or millions of times when a mature CTI program caused the threat to be completely avoided or mitigated and therefore not affect the organization. That happens orders of magnitude more than actual attacks occur. However, it just takes one. You can thwart 10 million attacks in attempts to grab your data or take down your systems, and one, the 10 millionth and one attack happens and steals your data and takes down your system. And that might either be the end of your organization or your reputation. So as defenders, we have to get it all. All right, now let's look at the Collective Intelligence Framework, or CIF, for Threat Intelligence Frameworks. We're talking about some of the frameworks out there. One of them is the Collective Intelligence Framework. The CIF, or Collective Intelligence Framework, is a cyber threat intelligence management system that allows you to combine known malicious threats, take all that information from disparate sources, and use it for incident response, detection, and mitigation. So that's called the Collective Intelligence Framework. You can parse, normalize, store, post, query, share sets of data from threat intelligence information. If you look at the little architecture that we see here, we have public data feeds. Let me go grab a laser pointer here. Look at that. So we have public data feeds. We use any public threat intel. Your CIF architecture can use it. We have private data feeds. You have your own data sources. Your CIF server, your architecture can use it. And take that information and output it to mitigation equipment, like your DNS sinkhole, firewall, or intrusion detection systems. Publish those daily feeds. Or using CIF clients, so like your Perl browser plugins or APIs. And so we can query, users can query index feeds to find out what's going on. So that's the Collective Intelligence Framework. Another one is CrowdStrike, the CrowdStrike Cyber Threat Intelligence Solution. This is a security strategy It's multi-layered. It enables your security team to not only predict, but understand cyber threats that would imperil your organization's assets, allowing you to anticipate who might attack next, prioritizing that. And there's the CrowdStrike logo. This is one of their pages of the latest threat reports and latest alerts. So a very nice solution. This is the CrowdStrike Cybersecurity Threat Intelligence Solution. All right, the next one we look at is NormShield Threat and Vulnerability Orchestration as our next threat intelligence framework. One of the things you want to keep in mind here is the term orchestration. Orchestration is a method of automating responses on a system. And usually orchestrated systems have either a visual methodology where I can take actions that are programmatically significant. I could actually put in my own code. Or in many cases, they're drag and drop solutions or drag and drop code snippets that you can take and automate some type of response. So orchestration is actually very important. And so what NormShield Threat and Vulnerability Orchestration is a unified platform to continuously scan for vulnerabilities. And that's another important word, they're continuous, right? We're always on the lookout for vulnerabilities. And we're looking for threats, detecting them automatically, manage and automate the process with the workflow engine. And here we see NormShield, a very nice little graphical output so that at a glance you can see what's going on in terms of threats to your organization. Our next threat intelligence framework is MISP or MISP, an open source threat intelligence platform. And it's open source. It is great for sharing, storing, correlating indicators of compromise. We're talking about IOCs all the time. For targeted attacks, threat intelligence, financial fraud, etc. So it uses those indicators of compromise and other information to detect and prevent attacks for threats against ICT infrastructures, organizations, or people. Here's an example of OSINT for a Cisco attack for Cisco iOS. And it gives you tags, right? If you look at the tags, you see the Cisco tag, we see cyber threat framework, consequence, destroy hardware, software, or data tag. We see a lot of information here. So this is a tool that's open source, meaning that it's a lot cheaper than some of the commercial ones. But you'll find that a lot of open source projects are implemented into commercial projects. The next one we look at is TC Complete. So this is a threat intelligence framework that security operations and analytics. So it's a security operations and analytics platform built in. Helps you to orchestrate, there's that word again, orchestrate, which is a form of automation, your security functions, but also the confidence that you are basing your tasks and decisions on vetted, relevant threat intelligence. So Threat Connect or TC Complete is another good solution. I've used solutions that are a lot like these that are both have very good orchestration, that have very good endpoint management, and that provide very relevant threat information to you. This is one that I've used before, Yeti, open source, distributed, machine, and analyst-friendly threat intelligence repository developed for incident responders. And what does it do? Well, it organizes all your observable indicators of compromise, CTPs, and knowledge of threats into a single unified repository. It has a very nice programmatic backend, very well done automation, and as you can see, a very nice graphical front end. So Yeti is yet another tool. Another one is ThreatStream. It is meant to speed detection of threats. How? Well, by unifying the security solution under one platform, all your solutions and tools, to help operationalize your threat intelligence. So it collects your threat information from hundreds of sources like STIX and TAXII feeds, open source threat feeds, commercial feeds, and many other feeds. So ThreatStream, another very good resource. And there are others. So you have IBM and Intel-NQ and Alien Vault and Argos, etc., etc. And you might actually know of some very good threat intelligence frameworks. What is one that your organization is using? And how does it compare to some of the threat intelligence frameworks that we see here? It's always a good idea to be researching the latest in threat intelligence frameworks to make sure that your specific product isn't being left in the dust by something new that has come along that changes the game. One thing to keep in mind when you're looking for and reviewing threat intelligence frameworks is that we live in an exponentially accelerating era, meaning that change happens quickly and unexpectedly, both in the area of cyber attack threat intelligence and in the area of threat response and threat response frameworks. So you have to keep your eye out there. If I have a framework that I've been using for the past 4 or 5 years, make sure that it is not being obsoleted this year. In this module summary, we've seen that we have threat terminology, we have the difference between data, information, and intelligence. Very important to know that. We've discussed the cyber threat intelligence characteristics and benefits, also different types of threat intelligence, your strategy, various phases of threat intelligence. Also, we've looked at the importance of risk management and SCIM and provided an overview of various organizational scenarios. We also discussed in detail about threat intelligence maturity and the different maturity models and various popular cyber threat intelligence frameworks. Well, what are we going to do next? Well, next, we're going to discuss the various types of cyber threats, indicators of compromise or IOCs, and we're also going to look at the kill chain methodology. That's it for Module 1.